Welcome everyone to this online event being broadcast on what is a reasonably sunny afternoon here at King's. I can see that we have attendees from all over the world with us today, so a special thanks to those of you who have either risen very early or stayed up until silly o'clock to tune in. We salute your dedication and thank you. The purpose of this event is really to give you an update on life at King's, what's been achieved in the last 12 months and what challenges there might be to come. Some of you might have attended a similar event we held last year, when I think it's fair to say the landscape looked very different in a number of ways, really. At that point, we were still very much in the thick of COVID restrictions, which have had such a significant impact, not only on the delivery of our teaching and research, but also on the more communal and convivial aspects of college life. But now seems like a good point to take stock again, and I'm pleased to say that we'll be hearing from four speakers today. Firstly, from the Provost, Professor Michael Proctor, who will then hand over to the First Bursar, Keith Carne, then on to the Senior Tutor, Dr. Tim Flack, and last but not least, to one of our undergraduate students, Maddie Kelly, who is currently the Vice President of the King's College Student Union. A couple of things just to note before we start. Please be assured that your cameras and microphones are turned off by default, so there's no danger of you being seen or heard by anyone else on the webinar. So if you do want to tuck into some lunch whilst watching, then go for it. And secondly, if you do have any questions as we go along, please do write them in the Q&A box, which you should be able to find below, and we'll try to get around to as many of them as we can at the end. But on that note, I'll disappear and I'll hand over to the Provost to kick things off. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jonty. I hope everybody can hear me. A welcome to all of you. You've had an introduction to the other speakers, and it's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you today. How is the college getting on? Well, we're coming out of the pandemic in reasonably good order. Our students are back. Many lectures are now in person. Some are still online, and social events are beginning to return to normal after the terrible time that we had in the last 18 months, when it seems we were all locked up in our rooms, unable to see anybody, unable even to shake somebody's hand. Now we are getting back to normal interactions, although some of the events in the hall have been reduced in numbers, partially for safety reasons, but also because there's been a problem with having the right number of staff. As everybody knows, there are staff problems all over the place, and our catering arrangements are no exception, but they have coped very manfully with shortages of staff and provided excellent events for the students and others. But it's very good that we've got beyond the point of compulsory isolation when people get ill, and so the whole dynamic of student life, as I hope Manny will endorse, has become much more normal. And we're very pleased that the great majority of our community behaved throughout our difficulties with great responsibility. We've avoided any major outbreak of COVID. And at the moment, there are very few cases. And as we know, these cases are usually of mild consequence. And so we do feel a lot more normal than we did. We're very proud of the way that we looked after our staff during the pandemic. There are very few cases among the staff, but the thing we're most proud of is we didn't have to let anybody go as a result of COVID. Some other places did reduce their staff, but we kept everybody. No one was compulsorily let go, even though we've had a number of challenges to our activities. Conference and catering, of course, almost vanished for a long time, and our tourism income has dropped enormously, although it's now beginning to pick up again. Turning now to the campaign, which has been going now for several years. We had an initial target of £100 million, which seemed like pie in the sky when we began. It looked like a nice round figure. But in fact, we are making excellent progress towards that target. We're so thankful for the loyalty and generosity of NRMs and other people who are not alumni of the college who want to support our work in the choir and elsewhere, who've been so generous. And we have actually got to nearly £82 million of monies raised out of the total of 100 million that we're seeking to raise before the end of the campaign. We've used the funds that we've been generously donated in all kinds of ways. Principally, I think we could say for the support of students, especially disadvantaged students. Our new SASSI program for disadvantaged students has been a great success. We run access courses, bridging programs, special tutoring for those who need extra help after getting offers. All these have been very successful and very well supported and approved of by the students involved. We've also been very careful to look after our students. There's been a lot of stress, of course, as a result of the pandemic. And in fact, the mental difficulties have become more common over the years in the college and in other colleges too. And we want to improve our mental health provision as much as we possibly can. Our own graduate students have been particularly hard hit, especially those abroad, and we've been able to help them more as well. We've started to give extra support to BAME students who now have their own tutor who they can go to for specialist advice, and that has proved they've been very grateful to that. On a slightly different side, we've been given funds to improve our research activity, and we're trying to understand how to make new ways to use our research money rather than the traditional research fellowships that we've all been used to and have been very successful. There are other ways in which we could leverage that money, we think, and we're starting our discussions on that. Also, again, due to support from others, we're starting new areas in the college. We've started up an entrepreneurship lab within the college, a sort of umbrella for anybody who's interested in the idea of starting their own, making their own initiatives, starting a new business or starting a new charitable enterprise. And that's been very generously supported by an alumnus. And we also have a summer research program for our students. Our undergraduate students are able to take part in summer research with fellows of the college to do a little project and introduce them to the idea of doing research. That too was very well supported this last summer. And indeed, the Chancellor of the University, David Sainsbury, who is of course a King's person, has been instrumental in supporting this activity. So we're very grateful to him as well. You might have seen, if you've been to the college recently, you will have seen some changes. We have a new building going up on Barton Road, the Croft Gardens building, which will be finished hopefully this summer. We have a lot of new rooms and family flats, and will transform our provision of accommodation in the college. And it's a really special building with very interesting passive house characteristics, so very highly insulated, very good environmental attributes. So we're very pleased to be able to build that. We've also refurbished the Keynes building. So those of you who may remember the Keynes building as a rather unpleasant warren, now it's a very pleasant, it's still a bit of a warren, but it's quite pleasant now with new furniture and new decorations and new kitchens, especially for the students. So we're very pleased that's gone very well. Old Garden Hostel, which some of you may remember, again, that's been refurbished, producing a lot of very nice, airy and rooms with an excellent view. And that's also going to prove a very popular place for students to live in. So we're very pleased we've been able to do that out of our resources and out of donations. And we want to keep the rest of our heritage handed on in good shape, of course, to the next generation. So it's important we keep maintaining our buildings, and we're going to start work shortly, I hope, on Spalding Hostel, which I know many people think is substandard, and I'm sure they're right. And also some improvements to the chapel. The chapel needs work on its roof, serious work on the lead roof. And all this work will be starting in the next year or two. Also, we're trying to be more environmentally friendly. In the Provost garden, there is a new water tank so that all the water from the roof of Bodley's will come into this tank, and we can water the garden without fear of extracting water from the mains or indeed from the river, which will make the Provost garden look nice, but also is the responsible thing to do. We're planning to put solar panels on large areas of the college roof, including possibly even the chapel roof, though that has not yet been determined. We have a new sustainability committee, which will ginger us on to be more sustainable in the daily life of the college and try to reduce our power consumption and to adopt greener initiatives. We're very keen on the environment and biodiversity. The wildflower garden, the wildflower meadow, which has been going now for 2 years. It's in its third season, promises to be equally spectacular this spring. And we're very pleased that that has attracted lots of attention in the national press, and also, I think, inspired some other colleges to do similar things. So, as usual, King's is leading the way in this matter. So, we've got a year ahead which looks more normal, and it's exciting that we're able to become more normal. And one particular thing which is very special this year is it's 50 years since women were first admitted as students at King's, and we plan events to celebrate that later on in the year. I've been asked to say what I'm feeling optimistic about. Well, I'm optimistic that we can continue to emerge from the difficulties we've faced. We do have some challenges ahead. The principal challenge is that we're losing our bursar, who's going to speak to you a bit later, because he's retiring. So no doubt Keith will have something to say about that. He's been bursar for, I think he'll tell us, 15 years. And yeah, I'm sure he'll have some reminiscences of his time here, but we will miss him. And we're very grateful to him for keeping the college's finance on such a steady footing. But we're also losing a lot of other people. Tim Flack, the senior tutor, who we'll talk to later, is retiring from that job at the end of this year. The development director, Lorraine Heeden, in another year. The Domus bursar in another year, and at the same time myself. So the search for my successor has already begun. I have no part in that, of course, but we do have a challenge ahead to replace these excellent people with others who will carry on the work of the college. So there will be a lot of change in the college, but I'm quite convinced that with the support of the fellows and others, we will be able to move on as we have done. And I'm hopeful that we will get to £100 million for our campaign, if only to guarantee the departure of the Provost. Then you can give your donations now, and if we reach 100 million, I promise actually to retire in 18 months' time. So I think that's all I'd like to say, except to welcome you again. And now I'm going to pass you over to Keith Carne. And I think what I do is I turn myself off and he turns himself on. So thank you very much for listening.
Hello, good afternoon. I think Mike is exaggerating a little. I think it's only 13 years, not 15, but I want to give you a sense of how the pandemic has affected the college. And it has had a significant effect. I think the biggest effect has been on our people. Students, particularly dealing with a lockdown, I think have had a very miserable time. All the social events and support that they would normally expect were much more difficult. And we had to try and be more imaginative about how to do that. But financially, like most organizations, we've suffered. The first lockdown, we lost a term's rent, which was significant. We lost almost immediately income from tourists, which has been very significant for the college in the past several years. And external catering, which we used to subsidize the internal catering for students, disappeared. I think those are all coming back, but the effect on the college's budget was significant. We decided early on, both council and the governing body, that we shouldn't panic about this. We wanted to restore the college to its earlier position. We were very conscious that to be able to do that, we needed not to destroy the organization that had worked well in the past. So we have not made any of our staff redundant. Those staff are the people who are going to enable us to rebuild the college's finances. We did try to make savings where we could. We were helped by the furlough scheme. We were helped by the stock market. Equities grew very significantly during the last financial year as the major stock markets rose. Shops in Cambridge that we own were rather less successful. They're all struggling like we are with the effects of the pandemic. Overall, we think the effects on our endowment of the pandemic, by the time we get through, will be about £4 million loss, which is significant. It's something we would want to restore as quickly as we can without damaging the college. And we think that will take a few years. We're looking at sort of planning 5 years ahead. We think at the end of that period, we should be restored to where we were, or very close to that. Obviously, that depends on predictions of what happens both to the pandemic and the economy generally, but it's not an unreasonable prediction, I think, at the moment. So during the pandemic, we've tried to continue. I've mentioned the difficulties our students have faced. Catering in particular have been imaginative about trying to send care packages to students who couldn't come into hall and have formal halls and the social meetings that they would normally have. We've continued with buildings. Some colleges, when the crisis began, sort of stopped building works, and our view was that this was almost perfect time to do the building work. It would cause much less disruption than otherwise, and so we pushed ahead. And I'm pleased to say that that proved to be right. We could do a lot, which would in normal circumstances be hugely disruptive, and it was much less so. So I think that's all gone pretty positively. I think the two things I've been asked to comment on particularly are the state of the college's endowment and how I think the college has changed over my time as bursar. I think the endowment is in a good state. We are probably about a third of the way down amongst other colleges in terms of the value of our endowment. But our support for students tends to be at a significantly higher level than most other colleges. There are lots of things from funding student hardship and the SASE program to supporting research, where we have a lot of research fellows compared with most colleges of our size and endowment. And these matter a great deal to the college. So our endowment is good and helpful, but we have very little difficulty in finding valuable things to spend the income on. And that makes us very reliant on support from donors. The initiatives to look at new things, to develop our support for students through the SASE Fund, to look at the different ways in which we want to help students who are suffering mental health problems after the pandemic, to look at better ways of engaging with others in research and working with university departments, other colleges to expand what we can do. All of those are things that I think the college is excited about doing, but to do it, we've been very dependent on support from our donors, and that's very helpful. If I look back on my time in the college, I think it is, I've enjoyed it. I think it's gone well. I think the team of college officers has worked closely together and constructively. I think we have made a significant difference. We've been able to increase our expenditure each year and do it while keeping within our budgets, with the exception of the last year where with the pandemic, we couldn't quite keep it within our budget. We've done a lot to buildings. When I became bursar, a lot of our buildings were in a very poor state. Compared with many colleges, our student rooms were not very attractive. And I think we've turned that round quite significantly. We have a lot of very, very attractive new rooms. The new rooms that we produced are very highly sustainable. As the Provost mentioned, Croft Gardens will be passive house. Indeed, we expect it to be carbon negative. It should actually be contributing electricity to the grid rather than taking it. So I think that's an achievement. It's not the end of the road. The chapel, will need re-roofing. We are trying to persuade Historic England that we should be able to put photovoltaic cells on the chapel roof. The Gibbs building is probably the building that most seriously needs more spent on it and major renovation. But I think we've made good progress, and that has relied on the support and generosity of many alumni and donors. So I thank you very much for that. And with that, I will hand over to the senior tutor, Tim Flack.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Keith, for that. So I'm going to speak about three things. The first one will be how things are looking for our students as we emerge from the pandemic, but then also how our access initiatives are progressing. And finally, the major changes and initiatives that have come about over the period of my senior tutorship. So that's the last 4 and a bit years now. So on the first one, things are looking much better for students now. So after a cautious start to the year, as others have said, formal halls have been re-established. The student societies are up and running. A lot of teaching is now in person, although there's quite a lot of sort of hybrid teaching going on. So students can access their lectures and supervisions remotely as well as in person. So I'd say King's is returning to its normal, vibrant self, with societies like King's Politics leading the way. And they brought in some really interesting and excellent speakers. It's even rumoured that Lord Sugar might be persuaded to come. And so we're just hoping that he doesn't fire too many of us. However, there is certainly a pandemic hangover. And again, others have already alluded to this, with some students who were allowed to progress academically from last year. So all you had to do was attempt your papers, didn't matter what mark you got, now struggling academically. And so we're supporting them with additional supervision, study skills support, extra mentoring. But we're also seeing, a complex mix of issues with a lot of mental health problems surfacing. Again, we're reasonably well equipped as a college with additional resources such as our mental health fund that we can use to supplement other university and college provision with things like additional counselling and therapy. Again, Mike's already highlighted this, but PhD students are worth mentioning here. And the reason for that is that PhD is not of a fixed duration. So many of our PhD students were unavoidably delayed in their research during the pandemic. And we're likely to see an unprecedented number of overshoots for which maintenance funding will be needed. So the graduate tutors are doing a great job of working with those students in this position to agree packages of financial support. And if necessary, we will use our studentship funds to provide additional support for overshooting students rather than the conventional use of them, which is to provide new studentships. But all of that said, I'd say in many ways, things are looking good, especially when the day-to-day life of our students is considered, where you just have to walk around the college and you just see that student life is returning to normal. There remain difficulties that I've alluded to, but I'm sure with the resources to overcome them. And so overall, I'd say there are grounds for cautious optimism, but we're not quite out of the woods yet. Okay, so that's enough on how we're emerging from the pandemic. Onto the access initiatives. Again, Mike has covered some of this, so I'll try to add to what he's already said. So here are some of the things that we're doing. And we've been doing this one for a few years now, and that's offer holder tutoring. So the idea there is that you could be an offer holder. So if you impressed us at interview, but you don't come from a background that can afford possibly extra private tuition to help you to meet your offer. So we're paying for that so that our offer holders from those sorts of backgrounds can receive additional tutoring aimed at helping them to meet their offers so that they can arrive here and immediately start realizing their academic potential. Similar to that, the bridging program, we're running that in collaboration with Christ's and Gonville and Keys colleges, with the aim of helping disadvantaged students bridge the gap between their home environment and the sort of schooling that they've been used to what they will experience when they arrive here. We know that that's often problematic, and so the bridging program is aimed at helping them to realize that they are here on merit and that they are going to be able to flourish here. A fairly new innovation is ongoing mentoring and tuition as a supplement to the supervision system, again for students who are finding it hard to adjust from the background they've come from to Cambridge education. BME Open Day, Target Oxbridge, both aimed at increasing ethnic diversity in the college. And again, as others have mentioned, it's now in its third year. The Student Access and Support Initiative, or SASI, aimed at creating an additional 10 places per year for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. This is just undergraduate students. And again, this has been successful so far in that the students that have been identified under the SASI scheme are generally flourishing very well here with the additional support they receive. Going to the future, we now have a dedicated admissions tutor, and she is absolutely passionate about widening participation. One area of weakness of the university is the outreach policy, which attaches colleges to certain areas of the country. So our link area is the northeast of England. But what it means is that depending on the dedication of each of the 31 colleges, you can find that there are pockets of schools and areas of the country that don't really get a look in. And so our admissions tutor is working closely with the university to think about how this could be more effective in the future. But also in terms of just our own link area, she's got ideas like involving our alumni who are living and working in those areas and who have volunteered to create better links with linked schools in the northeast, and also improved use of social media platforms, which have the benefit of being able to create a wider dissemination of what Cambridge is all about, to connect, and also to do things like connecting current King's students with prospective students. That can give them a sense of they could actually apply here and be successful here, because they'll see that our students are just surprisingly normal people. Okay, so that's it on the sort of access side of things. Going to the last few years that I've spent as senior tutor, it's been an incredible privilege to have the platform to be able to effect what I hope are largely positive changes within the college. And again, as others have mentioned, the support of my fellow college officers, the fellows in the college, staff and students has really helped to make this, well, I hope a success. The single biggest thing I'd say has been the close collaboration between tutorial and development, in terms of being able to articulate what our needs are in respect of student support and provision of student opportunities. And this has enabled some incredible resources and opportunities for students, most of which Mike has already mentioned, things like the summer research program, the Entrepreneurship Lab, the SASI Fund, the new accommodation for our graduate students at Cranmer Road and Croft Gardens means that we'll be able to accommodate all graduate students who want to be accommodated by the college. These have been great and positive changes for the college, and have come about because we've been working together with the development office. So that's been great. Not a highlight really, but managing things through the difficult period of the pandemic. What I would say, there's been a real positive to that, and that is the way that we've all been able to collaborate, so that's staff, students and fellows working together to come through a very difficult period, not unscathed, but as best we can. Bringing in a full-time admissions tutor has been a big success. What that's led to and will lead to in the future is seeing improvements in widening participation, access and outreach. All of these things are dear to King's. Again, others have said this, improving support for our BME students with dedicated tutors for BME matters has been a useful and important change. We've also started to bring in Judge Business School students. Probably in steady state we'll end up with 40 to 50 students, a lot of whom are part-time students, and again they have the support of a dedicated tutor, and also a lot of interested alumni are helping in this area. Keeping the fellowship topped up. So this has been increasingly difficult as the university creates more pressures on academics to engage with their faculty and with their research. But King's is still the most heavily resourced college in terms of being able to teach and mentor our students directly from fellows who are very eminent in their subject. So that's been a good thing. Last but not least, improved dialogue with the students via the reps. So working constructively together with the KCSU president and vice president has been a real highlight and has led to great benefits, I'd say, in terms of college-student relations. And on that note, I'd like to hand you over to Maddie Kelly for a direct insight into the student perspective.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the student experience at King's at the moment and how much this has changed since last year. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the experience of walking into the front of Court of King's is difficult to describe. And last year, because I was living off site and so little was being held in person, I only ever really walked through college once a week or so. But especially because I now actually live in college, this seems almost unimaginable. And as Tim said, you only really need to walk through King's now to see how much more lively it is. So there were times last year where I was worried that King's and the university were just something that I'd made up in my head and I was inventing essay questions and supervisions. But student life has thankfully changed immensely since last year. And it's so wonderful to be part of events like this, because for me, that's what makes the King's community feel real. So there are now formals on every week, and our ENTS officers have managed to keep coming up with amazing themes. So my favourite so far has been the Roaring Twenties formal at the start of the year, with the Harry Potter formal coming in at a close second. The bar is now always full of students, and seeing the faces that you study alongside in the coffee shop and the library, then in the bar each evening, really enhances the community spirit at King's. And I'm looking forward to the summer weather again, when we can sit in Bodleys by the river working, as we did last year, and listening to the made up facts by punters passing by. And I'd like to think that one of the centres of student life at King's is the student union, although I might be slightly biased. So last year during Lent term, I ran for welfare officer with my friend Tom, and we just enjoyed our time on the KCSU exec so much that he's actually now president and I'm vice president. And it's so great to have that student voice heard at so many levels of college. So we're trying to come up with new ways of gauging student opinion to make sure that voice is heard. So last year, the previous vice president set up a KCSU Instagram account, which has been a really great way of getting students more engaged, particularly as New Year's come in, because younger age groups tend to use Instagram a lot more than they use Facebook, which was the previous main way of communicating. And we now have all sorts of Google forms for feedback that get regularly sent out. And even just being able to meet in person every week with the exec rather online has really helped with stimulating conversations among students. And we actually just had our hustings at an open meeting last week for some roles that are being elected today. And again, just having that in person meant it was a much more interactive hustings rather than online. Last year, there weren't many questions going around. So yeah, and we've been meeting with Tim every week, which has been so helpful. And we still have pre-council and council every other week. So yeah, the current KCSU exec have been putting on some really great events aside from formals that are open to all students. And a favourite of mine has become welfare tea, which is really just a staple of the start of my Friday evening now. And this is run by Rosanna, the welfare tutor, alongside our welfare officers in the coffee shop each week. And it's just a really lovely space to chat to people and meet new people. So last summer, welfare teas were actually being held in the Fellows Garden, largely due to COVID restrictions and having to be outdoors. But it was such a nice space, and the catering team were really helpful with getting us picnic blankets and vats of tea that were easy enough to carry across to the Fellows Garden. So I'm really hoping that will be something positive from last year that we're able to take into the future. So the BME officers too have been organising a lot of events for the student body, with quite a few BME music nights in the bar and quizzes, especially at the start of this year, which was really great. And today there's a screening of a documentary celebrating the life of Desmond Tutu in the chapel, which they've organised with Mary, the chaplain, which is being followed by BME Heart Space. So Heart Space is another activity in King's that I'm constantly recommending to people. And it was even able to run some parts of last year, albeit at a reduced capacity. So it's an event where the chaplain plays calming music while students lie on the floor and look at the architecture of the chapel. And again, it's a really great reflective space. And I think all of the students really appreciate the fact that the chaplain's so happy to have the students involved in the chapel in the way we are, and it's such an accessible space. So the women's and non-binary officers have also been running some FemSoc events, such as a feminist book group that's been really interesting. And I think that's been a really great way of also encouraging mixing between different year groups that wasn't able to happen so much last year because we weren't sharing the same spaces. And next week for International Women's Day, there's going to be a women's and non-binary dinner. And as part of their commemoration of 50 years of women studying at King's, they are planning a celebration of all the women who have graduated since then from King's, as well as getting involved with the International Women's Day portrait project, which is currently happening to celebrate the women at King's today. So they've got student photographers that are going to help take those portraits. And recently they ran a quiz in the bar in conjunction with King's Politics, which was really good fun. And I'm sure others here will agree with me, as Tim mentioned, that one of the most active societies at the moment is King's Politics. And to even begin to list the events that they've put on so far this year would be an impossible task. And they've got an Instagram account, Facebook page, website that would do their work far more justice than I shall attempt. But some of my favourite speakers this year have been Professor Helen Pankhurst, the great-granddaughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, and granddaughter of Sylvia Pankhurst, and an access panel that was held on Sunday evening that featured Cambridge students, which led to quite an interesting conversation about access, not just at King's, but across the whole university. And some of their interviews have actually been posted on YouTube, and I definitely recommend having a watch. And there are also some student blogs from this year, which are on their website, which I've always found a really interesting read. And so, yeah. And I think the big upcoming event for King's is the Welfare Day on Saturday. So the welfare officers have been working really hard for the past few weeks to organise a range of events for a day of fun, and students are encouraged to take a break from their work for their own well-being. And I'm especially looking forward to the bouncy castle on the back lawn alongside some giant board games. And I know that some other students and societies have volunteered to run stalls alongside this, so it should be good fun. In terms of student welfare in the college, the welfare team have been incredible during my time at King's in signposting resources to students and regularly reaching out to people. And it's really encouraging to see this destigmatised approach towards mental health and well-being taken in King's, particularly given the difficulties that can be faced by young people at university, as it's such a big change moving away from home and the extra difficulties that were added to this by the pandemic. And whilst I was one of the welfare officers last year, I think the main piece of feedback that I got from students was how brilliant it was that King's have 2 CBT therapists, Barbara and Dominic, who are really wonderful, as waiting lists with the NHS can be weeks and weeks long, and there's only a limited number of sessions available for each patient. And seeking private therapy is not really an affordable option for the majority of students. And as it's been mentioned, there's also a BME tutor now. And I think this intersectional approach to mental health will make big improvements to support available for students. I also think that everyone has learned so much from the pandemic, and there are some positive things that can be taken forward that only really emerged because of COVID. So reaching out to people online can sometimes be a more accessible option for some, and it gives us choice in how we want to look after our own welfare and the ways that make us feel most comfortable. So the change that taking mental health and well-being in college seriously and in a destigmatized form that's been taken compared to that of other environments that I and others have previously experienced, such as those in secondary schools or even in the NHS, is so noticeable and making a really big difference to people's lives. So yeah, it's difficult for me to claim that student life at King's is returning to a normal because I never got to experience King's pre-COVID, but I think that our experiences over the last few years have sort of changed what this normal is. For example, we're now doing these online webinars again, but I hope this more flexible approach to communication will only expand the King's community. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maddie, and indeed to all of our speakers. Now, we have had a few questions in, so we'll just dive headlong into them. But if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. We'll start with this one, which is a very timely question, and perhaps, Tim, you might like to take this one. The question is how the university is supporting students who might be affected by the invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you, Jonty. That's a very good question and a very topical one. The Vice-Chancellor and the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education have written to all students, but also further than that to staff as well, to highlight that the university is committed to supporting staff, students who are particularly affected by this. As a college, we've written to all of our students saying if you are affected by this, perhaps because, well, certainly if you're from that area or from a neighbouring state, we've got relatives in those areas, then first of all, you can remain accommodated at King's. We're not going to send anyone home into a troubled area, and we'll provide financial support if that's needed for them to remain here. I know that the university has only just written to students to say, if you're being traumatized by seeing all of the dreadful sort of news coming out about this, then they're offering special counselling sessions. And again, we'll mirror that using our own resources at King's for our own students. And I'd say, yes, all students have been reached out to that we know are from these areas. Directors of studies and tutors have been asked to reach out to students directly. So we're trying to be proactive as well as saying, our doors are open. Reaching out is often very much appreciated by students, and so that's happened. So I like to think we're doing as much as we can, but as Maddie is aware, we have a door open policy. So if the student reps can think of other things that we could or should be doing in support of our students, we're very keen to hear about them.
Thanks, Tim. The next question is coming from someone who actually used to live on the old Croft Gardens site on Barton Road and had seen something regarding the archaeological dig which had taken place on the site. Mike, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about the dig and what's going on over on Barton Road.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm no archaeologist, I'm a mathematician, but I'll do my best. As part of the building works, there's always an archaeological investigation, and the archaeologists turned up quite extensive burial ground on the site of Croft Gardens, which was largely unknown about, I think, when the previous buildings were up, including both what we used to call Anglo-Saxon, but I believe we now should call early medieval graves, and also Roman graves. So the two sorts of cemetery almost lying on top of each other. This was actually a part of a rather larger complex of graves in that area running down to the river, which was much more, the river was much shallower and more dispersed then than it is today. So these graves have been excavated and of course the remains treated sensitively. A number of artifacts have been recovered, and have been taken away for analysis. Nothing extraordinarily valuable, one or two very nice bits of pottery and jewellery. And this has prompted us to finance a research fellowship in archaeology. So we have an archaeologist now who's a research fellow who's getting involved with researching the findings. And when she comes to the end of her time, we'll no doubt have a very interesting open day when we can see what she's discovered. So it's all been quite exciting. Of course, it all has to be covered up again when the building begins. So it's now hidden from view, but luckily we've benefited both from looking at these old graves and also from the material that's been found within them. I don't know if Keith wants to add anything to that.
No, I think you've summarised it very well, Mike. You know, we were aware that there were some Anglo-Saxon graves on the site from earlier maps, but I don't think anyone realised how extensive it was, and it did require quite significant excavation across the site before we were in a position to start building there. But we look forward to seeing the results both of that investigation and our research fellow.
Thanks both. The next question we have is about the chapel and what's going on in the chapel. We have someone inquiring as to whether the chapel is even open to the public at the moment for services. And Keith, maybe you just want to talk about what's upcoming in the chapel and indeed confirm that the chapel is available. Yes,
it is open. We've been asking people from outside the college to book in, so we know how many people are there and can manage numbers and access better. We think that's probably coming to an end fairly soon as things generally get back to normal. But services have continued in the college. The choir sing. We had a Ash Wednesday service yesterday, and there will be a full program, both Easter services and concerts going forward. So anyone who wishes to come to the chapel, say for the next few weeks, maybe it's wise to check online and book, but you'll be very welcome.
Thanks, Keith. And I think this might be the last question. And it's just a question about the summer research program, which I think Mike and Tim both mentioned. But Tim, perhaps you just want to explain a little bit more about that and what it is.
Yes, certainly. So for many years, we have run a limited summer research program where students were asked to go and speak to perhaps somebody who's already promised to supervise a dissertation in their final year. And then the college would find money from our restricted funds to support them over the summer, perhaps typically over 8 weeks, to do some research. This has just been turbocharged in recent with a very generous donation recently. So now we can have up to 30 students undertaking research placements across all STEM subjects and arts and humanities subjects. And the idea is that there's sort of two different modes. You can either come with your own proposal, which you've worked up with an academic who doesn't have to be a member of King's even, it could just be an academic who's a bona fide faculty academic. So that's the old mode that we used to run. But also fellows of King's are now advertising their own sort of research projects that they'd like students to get involved with, and then students can respond to those advertisements and come for a sort of short interview and with any luck take part in one of these placements, as I say, typically 8 to 10 weeks on a stipend that means that they can afford their accommodation and food and so on. It's the same as a student maintenance funding when you're an undergraduate here during term time. But the really great thing is it enables them to get fully immersed in a research project. So it's not like the sort of rather more prescriptive learning that you get as an undergraduate. It's the chance to go off at tangents, explore new areas under the supervision of a sort of eminent academic in the area. So it ran for the first time last summer with about 30 students taking part. And there was a recent research showcase that I think Jonty probably organised for us in which the students all gave talks or a poster presentation of the research they carried out. That was an entire afternoon, and it was very interesting. Lots of fellows attended, and so it's certainly been a really successful initiative.
Thanks, Tim. I would agree wholeheartedly. That's the end of the questions then. So we'll bring the session to a close there. Just a note to say thank you to all our speakers and indeed to our audience. We hope to see you again soon, whether that's virtually or in college in person. So thank you again.